Now, yesterday on this very show, a political analyst had called the US elections realignment politics. And our cover story is a good piece to take it further. The traditional bases are switching sides and the undecided voters are, well, still deciding. We start this show from a Catholic fundraising dinner in New York, where Donald Trump was in attendance in person. Kamala Harris made a virtual pit stop. And what transpired between them invoked a lot of laughter, but little sense.
Does it bother you that Trump guy insults you all the time? Because it really bothers my friends and me.
Oh, Mary Catherine, it's very important to always remember you should never let anyone tell you who you are. You tell them who you are.
Haters gonna hate, hate, hate. Shake it off.
Shake it off.
Shake it off.
Shake it off.
Always it's a rule. You gotta go to the dinner. You gotta do it. Otherwise, bad things are gonna happen to you from up there. You can't do what I just saw on that screen. But my opponent feels like she does not have to be here, which is deeply disrespectful to the event and in particular to our great Catholic community. Very disrespectful.
Now, Trump wasn't alone in calling Harris's absence disrespectful. Fellow Catholics agreed, and Harris was the first major party presidential candidate to skip the event since 1984.
22% of Americans identify as Catholic. Catholics will be a key demographic in every battleground state. I'm sorry, why is Vice President Harris not here?
Now, the annual dinner is a Catholic charity event. It has been a bipartisan tradition that attracts the city's elite that are majorly Catholics. The banter you saw earlier is usual, but given how close this election is, one has to look at who gains from this event. You see, Catholics are an important vote bank, the largest single religious denomination in America. And traditionally, they have sided with the Republican Party. The latest figures on a national level also show that Trump is in the lead among Catholic voters. The same number was evenly split back in 2020 between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Remember, Biden became the first Catholic president since John F. Kennedy. So while Trump is entering the Democratic territory of Black and Latino voters, Harris has mostly stayed away from engaging with the Catholic voters. Like she decided to skip this event in New York. Her team justified the act by saying that they would rather focus on swing states. And speaking of swing states, Pennsylvania, the main one, 2020 data shows 30% of the state's voters are Catholic. And the latest Real Clear Politics average shows that Trump is leading 48.3% to 47.9% in the state of Pennsylvania. Now, in the midst of all the political developments and the last leg of campaigning, Donald Trump is fighting another battle, a legal one. The Republican leader's election interference case has taken a dramatic turn, and the timing of it is being questioned. Late on Thursday, a judge denied the former president's request to block the release of court records and exhibits from the 2020 case. And as per reports, Trump's legal team had filed a last-minute request to stop case details from becoming public in the election interference case, requesting that the release be pushed to November 14th after the elections have taken place. The Republican presidential nominee has slammed the decision to unseal records as politically motivated to influence the 2024 presidential elections. However, the court slammed the defense, calling for relevant defense rather than making political statements. Just last year, Trump had pleaded not guilty to federal charges of undertaking a quote-unquote criminal scheme to overturn the results of the 2020 elections in order to remain in power. The trial resumed in August this year, and after a Supreme Court ruling on a separate case granting partial presidential immunity to Trump, the fresh indictment against the former US president is still based on the same 4 charges as before. However, Trump's team will try to get the case thrown out by shouldering it on presidential immunity, among other reasons. And to get us some perspective, we are now being joined by Dr. Matthew Tarpe, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Pittsburgh State University. Professor, thank you so much for joining us here on WION.
Thank you so much for having me.
There's so much to unpack, but let me begin with the Catholic voters. How important are they, and which side do you think they're swaying this time?
Well, obviously a large segment of the American electorate, so one that any candidate is going to ignore at their own expense. But it's important to keep in mind that the Catholic voters, the Catholic electorate is a very diverse electorate. So if you look among white Catholics, you see overwhelming favorability towards former President Trump. But if you look among Hispanic Catholics, you see overwhelming favorability towards the Democratic Party and Vice President Kamala Harris. So I think on balance, the polls I've seen have shown Trump in the lead. And given how tight this election is, I think that this group of voters could end up playing a very important role if either of the candidates are able to sway the group as a whole or any of the subgroups within the group in their direction.
Right. Professor, it also seems that Kamala Harris is in a very precarious position because she definitely is not aggressively campaigning in the uncharted territory to say which are the Catholic voters. But at the same time, polls show that she is also losing out on the traditional Democratic base, which are the black voters and the Latino voters. Why do you think this is happening?
It's hard to say. It's hard to pinpoint a cause. I think an important thing to keep in mind is that in the United States, we have the Electoral College. And so if you look at aggregate polls, it's informative, but it's important to keep in mind that what's ultimately going to decide the election is the polls in the states that are undecided, right? So it's going to matter who wins the electoral votes in those swing states. And I've seen polls that have shown recently, for example, among black voters, an increase in Vice President Harris's favorability from September to October. That was a poll from Howard University. But I do think the overall sort of decline among bases that are historically very supportive of the Democratic Party is very concerning for the Harris campaign, given how tight this election is. The issues that I have seen that are important to these groups of voters that, or at least the subgroups of these groups of voters that are more inclined to sort of switch from the historical or vote against the historical sort of precedent of their group has a lot to do with the economy and inflation. And so these types of issues, I think, are potentially having a significant influence. But I think it's hard to pinpoint an exact cause of any kind of decline in the polls.
All right, Professor, thank you so much for joining us here on WION and getting us your insights.
Thank you.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.